area of interest has developed over the years, and how peace movements have developed, and what sort of peace movements took place over the years. And finally, we are going to understand certain conditions of peace. So let's start our class. So today we are going to discuss about the evolution of peace research and peace movement. Um, if we look into the concept of peace studies, what is it? It is a field of study that developed after the Second World War. That is very important. And why it emerged after the Second World War? Why not before? Because um, the overall social and internationalist movements failed to prevent the outbreak of two world wars. So there was firstly, we have seen the outbreak of First World War, and after the First World War, we have seen certain attempts were taken by different stakeholders by establishing the League of Nations, by focusing on IR as an academic discipline. Can anyone tell me the year when IR was established as an academic discipline?
1919.
1919, right. So, what was the name of the university?
ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ ওয়েলস, মানে কারেন্টলি এটা আগের নামটা মনে নাই।
University of
Aberystwyth.
Aberystwyth. Yes. Kindly আরেকবার repeat করবেন.
Aberystwyth.
Aberystwyth. হ্যাঁ। So, it was situated in Wales, and the main task of studying IR as an academic discipline was to abolish the condition of war. That means the world has faced a great war. You know that during that time, First World War was known as the Great War, the war that ends all other war. So, considering that kind of context, people started to think that, okay, we are going to study the conditions of war, and we are going to systematically understand how to abolish war. IR was established as an academic discipline with this very noble focus of preventing war. It was very prescriptive in nature, that what sort of things should be um, considered to abolish this outbreak of war or the possibility of war. However, all those initiatives failed, as we have seen that certain political developments led towards the outbreak of Second World War, right? So, as the world has already faced a First World War and a Second World War, and in between it was only gap of 25 years, right? Second World War broke out 25 years later of the First World War. So, considering this kind of situation, there was a very urgent need of studying peace, or systematically taking a peace approach to study the conditions of war in a more, uh, you know, relevant, in a more lucid manner. So, naturally, therefore, the early development of the peace studies was greatly conditioned by the East-West arms race. What is East-West arms race? What happened immediate after the Second World War? Outbreak of Cold War, or we have seen the ongoing Cold War rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. During that time, what sort of political developments were going on? Number one is arms race, right? What sort of arms race? Especially the nuclear arms race. So each parties were acquiring different kinds of nuclear weapons. They were acquiring different kind of technology. All those political developments kind of push peace researchers to study the how they can prevent a possible nuclear war. because that was the main concern during the Cold War era. So the early development of peace research was greatly conditioned by this East-West nuclear arms race and the very threat of a catastrophic nuclear war. However, even though preventing a possible nuclear war was the primary focus of peace research back then, different sorts of different sort of other major issues were also included as a focal points of peace research. Those major issues included North-South wealth, poverty divide, and potential effects of global environmental constraints. That means the economic inequality that was, sustaining between the global North and global South. Do you know what is global North? Shahriar, can you explain what do you understand by global North? অন্য কেউ?
Yes, man. The global north are essentially the
Okay, let me explain. Global North and Global South, we basically divide this kind of categories in terms of the economic development. That means when a country is economically developed, industrialized, we categorize them as countries from Global North. So the idea of North means what? Geographically, if you think, what is the geographical position of North? It is on the upper side of the map, right? And what is the position of South? It is in the below, right? Below of the map. When we see in a map, we identify South in the below and North in the upper side. So therefore, economically, it is said that the developed countries are part of global North and the underdeveloped or the economically deprived parties are part of global South. So, therefore, peace studies, even though they started to focus at the initial stage, they focused on the nuclear arms race or the possible outbreak of nuclear war. Later on, they have included the dimensions of economic inequality, economic disparity between global North and global South, and also they have included the potential adverse effects of global environmental constraints. Later on, if you look into the history of peace studies, the peace study has only become established as a formal field of study in the post 1945 context, as we have already discussed in our previous point. So, Sorokin, Wright, Richardson, are you writing it down? Have you been able to? Okay, let's see. As I have written three names in this box, they are considered as the pioneer of peace studies: Sorkin, Wright, and Richardson. So they are the basically pioneers who have taken the initial interest in the development of peace research. And later on, we have seen that the nuclear arms race, proxy wars. We have studied proxy wars of Cold War era. Am I audible? Am I audible to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then you have to respond. You have to respond to my questions. have we studied proxy wars? Can you recall
Yes, ma'am.
what sort of proxy wars?
Vietnam War, sort of proxy, not entirely, but Afghanistan war between Russia and USA and CIA was funding Mujahideen, and
Cuban
then
Missile Crisis.
it's not a
Yeah,
war.
Cuban Missile Crisis was not a war. Okay, but Vietnam War was an example of proxy war because proxy forces of Soviet Union was there, Soviet Union and China. This Viet Cong was getting support from a particular great power of that time.
Then
So,
Korean War as well.
the Korean War is a very good example of proxy war. So, during that time, nuclear arms race, proxy wars, violences were going on. So, we have seen different colonial states. What were the colonies of different great powers? India itself was a colony of British Empire, and then there were French colonies in African continent, in Asian continent. So there were different colonies, and violences were erupting in those colonies. Therefore, peace studies have included all those aspects of um, violences as their focal area. Now, all these issues have created a situation where scholars started to argue that or started to realize that the very structure of this world order is very instable because we are seeing the possibility of this a catastrophic nuclear war or proxy wars are going on. So it is very unstable in nature. So those instabilities also pushed the researchers to study peace research in a very systematic manner. Now let's see the academic development of peace research. In 1945, Lenz basically established Peace Research Laboratory in St. Louis. Let me just write it down. Peace Research Laboratory. Which year? 1945. So in 1945, Lenz has established the Peace Research Laboratory in St. Louis. Later on, it was parallelly developing Dutch jurist Bart Rolling, Dutch jurist Bart Rolling. So he established peace study or polemology, peace studies or polemology. What is the name of the person? He was a jurist and his nationality was Dutch. So Dutch jurist Rolling, he established polemology in Netherlands. So what is polemology? It means the study of war or the study of peace. So polemology is another term for peace studies, and he established this peace studies in the context of Netherlands. Later on, very interestingly, we have seen the contributions from different mathematicians and natural scientists. So usually we think that peace study is part of social science, right? However, during that Cold War era or initial stage of Cold War, we have seen that mathematicians and natural scientists are contributing in the field of peace studies. How they are contributing? they have basically published this bulletin. The name of the publication is the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. What was the name of the publication? What is the name of the publication?
The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists.
Yes. So, as you can see, it is very self-explanatory in the name. The atomic scientists or the natural scientists who are working with numbers, with different technological developments, they were more concerned about this peace research, and they were quantifying. They were, dealing with large amount of data to analyze the consequence of political development or the consequence of possible outbreak of war. Later on, in 1950s, we have seen the introduction of Bulletin of Research Exchange on the Prevention of War. Bulletin of Research Exchange. Bulletin of Research Exchange on the Prevention of War. On the prevention of war, and that was established in the USA. In the middle 1950s, we have seen that Journal of Conflict Resolution was developed. Journal of Conflict Resolution. Journal of Conflict Resolution. It was developed and it was based on the Center for Conflict Resolution. It was based on the Center for Conflict Resolution at the University of Michigan. So the purpose of the Journal of Conflict Resolution were twofold. Firstly, the journal was focused on the concept of preventing war. And they have emphasized that the prevention of war is the most practical problem the world was facing during that time. And secondly, they have focused on the need of intellectual progress that should be made. The need of an intellectual progress that should be made in the area of peace study. Later on, we have seen that the Norwegian scholar Johan Galtung has established and founded the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, or in short, you can say PRIO. Peace Research Institute of Oslo. He established this research institution in the year 1959. And this institute has published two very prominent journals. The name of the journals are Security Dialogue and Journal of Peace Research. In 1959, Johan Galtung has established the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, and this institution basically publishes two prominent journals. The journals are Security Dialogue and Journal of Peace Research. So in the middle of this academic development, certain controversies arose between the peace researchers and the realist scholars of international relations. So in early 1960s, the realist school of international relations started to say that the failure of League of Nations and the intensity of ideological division between Western liberal democracies and the totalitarian systems of the Soviet bloc as providing an urgent need to undertake research. So realist scholars were indicating that during Cold War era, the rivalry, the intense rivalry between these Western democracies and totalitarian regimes of Soviet bloc was going on. And in this intense conflict or intense rivalry, the survival of the Western democracies was very crucial. They were afraid that how in which possible way this Western democracy may survive um, among this intense Cold War rivalry. So they have focused that for the sake of the survival of this Western democracies, a systematic study of peace research is needed. And who pushed this idea? The the realist scholars of international relations. They were focusing that for the sake of the survival of the Western democracy in the face of this extreme Cold War rivalry, we need to study peace in a more systematic manner. So they are focusing on the state survival. Okay, this is very important. However, what the other peace researchers were focusing, they were focusing that um, the the realist lens of viewing peace research is a very narrow and Western ethnocentric outlook. What is ethnocentric? What is ethnocentric? Ethnocentric.
Ma'am, when one thinks that their culture is the best
Yes. So it is,
or the superior.
yes, it is limited towards a particular geographical area, or it is limited for particular population. You cannot apply it at global scale. Suppose the Eurocentric understanding or the Eurocentric view we often study, that is an example of ethnocentrism. Okay. So the peace researchers were describing this realist understanding as a very narrow Western ethnocentric outlook. So let's move on to the new agenda of peace studies beyond the Cold War politics. Three major issues pushed peace research to expand its area of interest. So in Cold War era, we have seen that peace research started with the ambition of preventing the possible causes of war or preventing the possible um, catastrophic nuclear war. However, three major developments happened which forced the peace researchers include other necessary issues. So what were those three developments? Number one, former colonies were getting political independence throughout 1950s and 1960s. So we have seen that how different nations were getting political independence from different colonial powers. We have seen that a number of African states were getting independence from France and Britain and Belgium. There were Belgian colonies as well. So in Asian context also, we have seen that different new nations are arising out of this decolonization process. However, what was very interesting that these countries are achieving certain political independence from their colonial rulers. However, they are unable to achieve the economic independence. They are still somehow dependent on their colonial power because of this economic issue. The economic disparity is still prevalent in these former colonies. So it was number one, which pushed the peace studies to expand. What is number two? So starting from 1960s to 1970s, the global environmental concerns surfaced as crucial issue. Have you heard about the Stockholm Conference? The Stockholm Conference of 1972. So during that time, we have seen, have you heard about the book called Silent Spring? Silent Spring? Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. So in 1963, a biologist, she was possibly marine biologist. So Rachel Carson, she has written this book titled as Silent Spring. She basically brought the focus of the whole world about this, the threat of different poisonous chemicals and how it can affect the human life and the overall ecosystem. That
Please.
grabbed the attention of broader audience, and people um, started to be more concerned about this environmental degradation. So throughout these 1960s and 1970s, we have seen that overall the civil societies were much more active in terms of identifying the threat of ecological disaster, and the way the civilization is undertaking the economic development, it is going to hamper the overall ecosystem, and in near future it is going to uh, threat the very existence of human beings themselves. So therefore, this environmental concerns was surfacing, and we have seen the Stockholm Conference in 1972, which was focused on limiting the economic growth for the sake of the survival of global ecosystem. Then the number 3, it was the Vietnam War, which created controversy and radical peace research. And the radical peace researchers argued that injustice were such that there could be occasions when violence could be justified in the pursuit of justice. So there were certain radical peace researchers who have commented by considering the context of Vietnam War that injustices were such that there could be occasions when violence could be justified in the pursuit of justice. So the war was happening to achieve justice, some sort of justice or some sort of ideological domination. So to serve the purpose of this kind of justice, various injustices were happening. Injustices against the civilians or the human right violation was happening in the context of Vietnam War. So this sort of understanding or the outbreak of this sort of injustices led towards the development of maximalist agenda. Maximalist agenda. Okay, what is maximalist agenda? Let me just write. There were two agendas. One is maximalist. Another one is minimalist. So in maximalist agenda, we have seen that the peace research scholars are including all sort of injustices and all sort of broader issues of violence and all sort of aspects of peace research. So one of the pioneers of maximalist approach was the Johann Galtung. So Johann Galtung, when he has introduced the concept of structural violence, that was basically an indication of maximalist approach. So what is minimalist approach? Minimalist approach has focused on the original aim of peace research. What is the original aim of peace research? It was to prevent the possibility of nuclear war. So minimalists were focused on just in a very narrow aspect, that how to prevent the possible outbreak of nuclear war, and maximalists were expanding their area of study, especially when Johann Galtung has established the concept of direct violence and structural violence. Okay, next one, the late 1970s onward. So we were kind of discussing that how at the initial stage of Cold War, the peace research was focused on abolishing nuclear war or preventing the possible outbreak of war, and how to ensure the survival of different states. Peace research was focused on that part. However, simultaneously, we have seen that these three major issues have also focused, were also part of focal points, and that basically pushed the scholars to expand their area of studies. And this happened simultaneously in 1950s and 60s, and also in 70s in the context of Vietnam War. In late 1970s, especially if you look into two important events of 1979, what happened during 1979? What was the prominent incident? One was the Islamic Revolution of Iran. Can you recall? Can anyone recall the Islamic Revolution of Iran in 1979 and the hostage crisis? Have you studied the history?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so in 1979, we have seen that a revolution happened in Iran, and subsequent hostage crisis also happened. The US, the officials of US embassy were basically in a very in a hostage situation by the Iranian authority, and that created certain political tensions. And also in 1979, Afghanistan was attacked, was invaded by
By
Soviet
USSR.
Union. Yes, as Shahriar was mentioning. So in 1971, two very significant events happened. One in Iraq, and another one is the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. As this was happening, and throughout the 80s, we have seen another very dangerous phase of Cold War. So in from the late 1960s to early 1970s, we have seen that certain conciliation was going on between those two Cold War rivalries. However, by the end of the 1970s, we have seen that Cold War was reviving in a new phase, in a most dangerous phase of that time. So as Cold War rivalry was again taking much broader foothold, naturally, the peace research was taking a back seat, because as the world was more focused on hardcore power politics in the midst of these two events, and all other political rivalry was again taking were gaining its much more prominence. So in that context, peace research had to take a back seat in the late 1970s to early 1980s. In present scenario, if we look into the focal areas of peace research, what sort of issues are basically the current interest of the peace studies? There are 7 issues. So I will request you all to write it down. The 7 issues or 7 focal areas of peace studies in our current scenario. Number 1 is peace studies is focused on studying the underlying causes or root causes of violence. Peace studies is focused on studying the causes, underlying causes or root causes of violence. Root causes of violence. Number 2, it has emerged as a interdisciplinary. It has introduced the interdisciplinary approaches. Interdisciplinary approaches. Interdisciplinary approaches. So what sort of interdisciplinary approaches? It took insights from political science, international relations, from history, and all other branches of social sciences. It has included all those disciplines to study the concept of peace and conflict. Thirdly, the non-violent transformations. It studies the non-violent transformations. So what is non-violent transformation? It searches for the peaceful ways to settle disputes and prevent possible outbreak of violences. So when a possible conflict is arising, it focuses on peaceful ways to settle down those conflicts before it escalates to further violence. And it also focuses on the matter that if violence breaks out, in any case, violence is arising, it focuses on ways to mitigate them. Number 4, it focuses on multi-level analysis. What sort of multi-level analysis? In our statist perspective, we focuses on internal and external affairs of state. Especially when we do foreign policy analysis, we focuses on external factors and internal factors. However, peace research focuses on multi-level analysis. This multi-level analysis includes analysis of individual level, group level, state and interstate level. And it goes beyond this internal external dichotomy, right? So the multi-level analysis is including individual, group, state and interstate levels of analysis, which is going beyond what? Internal and external dichotomy of statist perspective. Number 5, it focuses on a global outlook. What sort of global outlook? It suggests the adoption of global and multicultural approach. So it is going beyond this ethnocentric Western view. Rather, it is trying to associate with different cultures, different political contexts throughout different geographical area. It is trying to go beyond this Eurocentric understanding, and it is trying to include all those aspects, all different cultures, all different political contexts, and trying to establish a global outlook. Number 6, it is focused on analytical and normative issues. So what is normative issues? In case of peace research, we have seen that most scholars have been drawn to this particular discipline based on certain ethical concerns. So it is, of course, grounded in ethical concerns. When you talk about prevention of war, it is, of course, the ethical concern which push you to think about the structural violence or the violation of human rights. Therefore, it is the very ethical concern that pushed the scholars to study peace research. Therefore, this is where the normative aspect is also grounded. So what is normative aspect? We know that normative means it is very much based on certain norms, and norms are very much connected with these ethical concerns. So naturally, study of peace research is very much based on these ethical concerns, and thus it is grounded on normative considerations. Number 7, peace research focuses on theory and practice. We, as we have already discussed, scholars have provided different theoretical understanding on how to study peace. For example, Johan Galtung has talked about structural violence. Different other scholars have talked about different conditions of war and how to prevent war or how to establish war. Johan Galtung has talked about how to establish the positive peace aspect of society. So these are what? These are very conceptual development or theoretical development. Similarly, as scholars are involved in this theoretical development, scholars are also involved in practical aspects. What sort of practical aspects? The peace researchers are very frequently engaging with different NGOs, different government departments, and also they are involving with different intergovernmental agencies also. So that means the scholars are simultaneously engaged in theoretical development and also in practical issues, dealing with practical issues. So these are the 7 major areas of the present scenario of peace studies, or the present focal points of peace studies. Finally, if we look into the methods of inquiry for peace studies, there are 2 approaches, or 2 methodological approaches that are focused when it comes to the study of peace research. Lens, again, name of the author is Lens. This person, this scholar, Lens has published a book. The book title is Towards a Science of Peace. Towards a Science of Peace. Towards a Science of Peace. So in this book, he emphasized that study of human attitude are essential in understanding the phenomenon of war and peace. He basically focused that the study of human attitude, or especially the subjective and emotional factors of human beings, are important to study the phenomenon of war and peace. And he
Ma'am,
is
study of what attitude? I'm sorry, I missed it.
study of war and peace. War.
No,
WAR.
study of what attitude?
Human.
Human attitude. Oh, okay. Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Study of human attitude, and especially the subjective and emotional factors. They're important to study the concept of war and peace, according to Lens. And he has said this in his book called Towards a Science of Peace. So this is part of scientific methodology. Okay? Scientific approach. The scientific approach is focusing on exploring the mathematical equations, is focusing on mathematical equations for predicting when an arms race will end in war. So they are dealing with different set of data. They're analyzing the data in a very quantitative way. They're quantifying the data to predict the possible outbreak of a war or the possible end of an ongoing conflict. So suppose Russia-Ukraine war is going on. So in a scientific approach, the scholars are going to take the considerations that how much military equipment are being used in this war and how much resources are left for both belligerent parties. And considering these factors, they are going to predict that in which year the war may end. So this is a very, this is based on mathematical calculations, and this is part of the scientific approach. The scientific approach is basically trying to focus on establishing causal relationships. What is causal relationship? Causal relationship. Causal relationship basically indicates the cause and effect relationship between different factors. That means if a possible war outbreak, if the outbreak of a war happens, one of the factors of that war can be arms race, right? Before the outbreak of First World War, we have seen that different European states were involved in arms race. That arms race was considered one of the many factors of the Great War. So this is a causal relationship that you are analyzing the factors and then you are establishing the outcome with it. That means the causes of war is arms race, and the effect of arms race is outbreak of war. This is what we understand by the concept of causal relationship, and that is also part of scientific approach. The second approach is interpretive analysis. What is interpretive analysis? So growing recognition is emerging that interpretive understanding of social action is more helpful in analyzing the intentions of actors and meanings of events. It is focusing on intersubjective understanding of conflict. Rather than going for mathematical calculation, it is recognizing that the social action of individual actors or individual leaders, how they are taking or how they are considering the current world order, or how they are, you know, how they are kind of interpreting the intentions of their enemies. This sort of interpretation is important to understand the underlying causes of conflict rather than going for broader data set or broader mathematical calculation. This interpretive understanding is important, and these are part of this interpretive analysis. So these are two prominent methodological aspects in the inquiry of peace studies. One is the scientific approach, another one is the interpretive analysis. So for today, that's all. Do you have any confusion or any opinion or something you want to share with the class about today's session?
Ma'am, could you quickly repeat number 5 of present scenario if it's okay?
Okay, so there are 7. You are talking about the current focus of peace studies, right?
Yes. Number 5 one, the one that came after multi-level analysis.
Global out, which went beyond the ethnocentric understanding and included different cultural and